Yeah, Rick, if I could just maybe wrap this up quickly.
Yeah.
I have a pretty extensive article up at stevekallas.com on this case, but I did want to say one other thing in reference to what you said about not taking water breaks. I, too, when I was in high school in the 70s at Power, we never took water breaks. I mean, it just didn't happen. The best races at the end of practices were to the water fountain, frankly, at basketball or baseball. But, we've talked about where does this guy get his mentality. He's 36 years old, but it came out today in the Courier-Journal that he had played for Howard Schnellenberger at Louisville.
Yeah.
And Howard Schnellenberger, who you recall, was a superstar coach in Miami, went to the pros, didn't have success, was always a tough guy. And supposedly Max Gilpin's mother has testified that at the hospital, Stinson, the coach, was telling her about playing for Schnellenberger and how strict he was and how strict he was about water. Schnellenberger in 97, I believe, was sued because the kid almost died from heat stroke. That case was dismissed. There is some federal case law that someone's going to have to look at. I didn't really have time to look at it, where these coaches were given some kind of immunity. That might be a factor, but this is a state court criminal case, as you know. But in that case, Schnellenberger said, oh, yeah, I have strict water policies. I learned from Paul Bear Bryant. And, of course, that's the Junction Boys, anybody who read that. So there's a tie back. And again, this is sometimes about mentality. You know what the football mentality is. It's very tough, very, I'm a man. I don't need water. And I thought personally that had changed over the last years, and I think for the most part it has. But maybe that's the tie back, frankly, where this guy thinks he can do this kind of thing because his coach did it and his coach's coach did it. And all those coaches are, legendary coaches.
Well, it obviously is all part of the culture. And we'd like to think, and clearly the Steve from the high school coach from Princeton who just called said, look, we've all sort of evolved from the old days back in the 60s and 70s where football players weren't allowed to get water during hot days because obviously it's a huge risk to any kid's welfare. But again, apparently there's still some of this mentality that still exists. I know a lot of the states have legislation in place where obviously at a certain level, heat index, you got to do some things to make sure the kids get breaks. That's just common sense, though. And obviously every coach theoretically wants the best for their kids and wants to make sure the kids stay healthy. So you would think nothing wrong with practicing when it's hot out, but you got to make sure there's a lot of breaks, a lot of shade, a lot of water. Make sure the kids are hydrating themselves.
Correct.
Now, Steve, let me go quickly to this unusual, bizarre case up in upstate New York, where, well, I just read you some of the media reports. This gentleman named Gildo LaCourte of Wingdale, New York, ran out of the stands during a boys' varsity basketball game last week, a game between Haldane High School and Dover Plains. Apparently, the father took exception to a scuffle on the court between his son and two players from Haldane High School. The players were diving after a loose ball. And it was at that point that LaCourte allegedly, who quite frankly, according to eyewitnesses, had been quite vocal during the game, he literally came out of the stands and threw some punches at the Haldane players who were chasing after the ball. Now, no one was hurt, and LaCourte was removed from the gym. The game continued on. But, the guy was arrested. He charged with endangering the welfare of a minor. I don't know why he wasn't charged with assault and battery. But this is another example of, again, where parents just are losing control. And you would think, especially when it comes to high school basketball games, when they can be very, emotions run high, there's got to be more security in place. And somebody made the point along the way, well, this is the job of the referees in the game to control the parents. No, it's not the job of the refs in the game. It's the job of the athletic director and the host high school to make sure there's enough security so this kind of stuff doesn't happen.
Yeah, the referees, they have so much to do. I just went to a high school game at Edgemont last night. They have so much to do controlling the game on the court. But I can tell you, this gentleman was not charged with assault and battery because there was not sufficient injury in New York. You need some kind of actual physical injury to be charged with assault. Even though from the law school perspective, Rick, as you know, assault is a threat.
Yeah.
But in New York State's criminal law, to be charged. So what happened was he's been charged with 2 additional violations for harassment, and that's essentially assault when you really don't hurt somebody. So even though he might have swung and contacted these kids, he didn't hurt them sufficiently enough in the policeman's view. He was arrested 30 minutes after the incident took place. So he's now charged with a misdemeanor endangering the welfare of a child because one of the players was 15 that he hit, and also 2 violations for harassment for hitting each one of the players. The other one was 17.
I mean, let's just take a step back, folks. Think about this for a second. You go to a high school varsity boys basketball game, and in the fourth quarter, all of a sudden there's a loose ball, and the kids from both teams are obviously valiantly trying to secure it for their team. And all of a sudden, one of the dads decides to come out of the stands and not just, just puts himself into the mix and starts actually throwing some punches at the kids on the opposing team. Now, not only is this bizarre, but just imagine how embarrassed his kid must be to suddenly look up from the floor in the gym and see his dad is out there throwing punches. Now, perhaps you can make a case. This is where a dad feels like, I have to protect my son. But this is just unbelievable. Well,
and stunning.
And it's just another standard case of sports parenting going bizarre in terms where a father feels that they have to put themselves into the entire mix. Steve, I don't know what's going to happen with this guy. Again, I think it's just another warning to high school athletic directors in particular. You got to make sure there's security in place. No, you can't predict this kind of stuff, but you got to have people patrolling right in front of the benches throughout the game so this kind of stuff doesn't happen. It's just not fair. So, God forbid somebody had been seriously hurt here, then you have a real mess in your hands. And again, the situation with down in Kentucky, we will see what happens with this trial to see what goes on. It's just, again, if I'm a high school football coach, I'm watching this very, very closely. Steve Kallas, my thanks as always. I wish I had more time, but again, thank you for doing your homework on this situation down in Kentucky. And of course, we'll talk to you real soon.
Thank you, Rick. Good to be with you.
Thanks, Steve. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Sports Edge. My thanks as always to Dove and of course to Tom, our intern. Now stick around for Mike Francesa. He has got a Super Bowl show on the NFL Now. I'll see you next week right here on the Sports Edge.
Sports Radio 66 WFAN.